Let's all give a hand and a warm welcome to Satish Subramanian.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. So again, thanks to Gerard for the very nice, kind words. It's my pleasure and honor to be here. Spend the evening at CLU Alumni. It was a great foundation for me. So I completed my MBA here in early 90s, and it's a great opportunity for me to be back here and see how much the campus has changed, etc. But at the same time, spend an hour or two here this evening, share with you some thoughts around how to improve business performance and how we all, even at an individual level, can be more successful by making our companies or endeavors more successful. With that said, I know that it was a mouthful in terms of what I have done, etc. But just in layman's terms, a lot of my work and background is around improving businesses, working with individuals of different backgrounds, profiles, and making things better. So I've always had this desire, passion around making things better, solving business problems of different types. And so that's the journey I embraced, primarily by working for different management consulting companies. And that's kind of what I've been doing, which ultimately led to thinking about what are some of the common gochas, problems I have seen on projects of different types. And so that led to me pushing the envelope a bit and kind of authoring some work which is very pragmatic in nature that I'm hoping each one of you can take away in the next 45 minutes or so. So I've extracted some of those knowledge nuggets, and that's what I hope to share at a very high level. So we're going to keep it kind of fairly informal. I do want to encourage Q&A discussion. The way I have framed this up, we've got about 45-50 minutes. So I'm going to kind of give you kind of the topic, share some roadmaps, share some high-level frameworks, interject some examples along the way. If you have any burning question, I'm fine. If you want to just raise your hand and ask me then and there. Otherwise, we are going to have like 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A type of session as well. So does that sound like a plan? Great. Again, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Let's see. Make sure that now. So that's the topic. How can we make substantial improvement in business performance? So that's kind of the background, etc., that we already covered. So what I've done is I've broken it up into two different segments. As I'm going to be using different terms, I wanted to lay the proper context around what is business transformation, what are the barriers to business transformation, and then piggyback off of how to make transformation endeavors successful. So the second part of the agenda is really around how to build transformational capabilities, what are some of the tools and techniques out there that will help us to make a transformation successful, and then we will have a Q&A session. I'm hoping to spend 15 minutes or so in the first 15-20. I would spend another 20 minutes, maybe 25 on the second section. And so that's kind of how I have mapped this out for us. With that said, a quick show of hands. Which industry sectors you have contributed to? So just quick, any folks here from the healthcare who are working for healthcare companies? Okay, and I met one person from Amgen. What about financial services? Any individuals here who have contributed to financial services sector? Okay. High tech, telecom, energy. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so quite a few from that industry sector. What about retail, consumer products? Anyone? Interesting. Okay, so I think I found more raising of hands for the high tech and the retail side. Government, federal, state, county. Oh, okay. Good. It just kind of gives me a good flavor of the kind of knowledge that's assembled in this room. So that way, I can also replay some pertinent examples along the way. I already used the term transformation. Okay, so what does Satish mean when he says business transformation? And it's a very highly used word, maybe overused, depending upon where you are at and what you are doing. But definitely in terms of what I currently do, I see that umpteen times. So a transformation is a complex initiative. Right? It's really a complex initiative. It's around innovating business. And whenever I talk about business innovation, it could be innovation of the business model, it could be processes, systems, some combination of that. Similarly, transformation for very large entities, it could be at the high enterprise level, or it could be at a business unit level, particular divisional level. So depending upon what we're talking about, that's the scope of a transformation. Increasingly, there is blending of the necessity to understand change at an individual level, change at an organizational level. So business transformation to be successful, it's an organization change endeavor as well. So it's a combination of those things. In net, I would summarize it as transformation is about execution of business strategy. It is the execution of the business plan. But the key focus here is innovation, which means drastic change, versus incremental improvement, which gets into total quality management, small tactical changes. Here we are talking about really substantial change, which is a tough endeavor, which necessitates making some tough decisions along the way, and it necessitates also a lot of engagement, buy-in at different levels for it to be successful. One of the reasons I started doing research and spending more time on this is over the last decade or so, there has not been substantial progress around the business transformation space. So what I mean by that is, here are some of the statistics here. McKinsey, which is a big strategy consulting house, does studies every year, and all their studies have shown that companies that embark on transformation exercises, only about 25-26% of them have been successful. PMI is the Project Management Institute. Project Management Institute does a lot of studies because their focus is on execution. So they have done ongoing studies on execution, and they have always said that there's a lot of dollars lost on the table on strategic change initiatives. The study by Economist Intelligence Unit, I find it very fascinating, which came out in 2013, where they really tied the necessity to think of transformation being necessary for improving your competitiveness, and also that study tied it to the importance of execution. It's the importance of not just having a strategy, a grandiose plan, but also the fundamental mechanics of what needs to happen on the ground. So there was a lot of focus on the execution aspect of it. And some of these, all these statistics, I'm also complementing it with my own experience. I currently am responsible for two very large companies in terms of doing all the consulting work. So I am responsible for doing all the work we do at Wells Fargo Bank, large institution. I'm also currently responsible for all the work in terms of transformation we are doing at Kaiser Permanente. So both of these, so one of them is in the financial services sector, another one is in the healthcare industry sector. But in terms of all these are across industry. Earlier I asked you which industry sector you belong to, but these are problems that all industries are kind of facing in terms of how to really get better at completing transformational exercises in a successful way. So what are some of the key factors that have been derailing transformation? There are a whole bunch of them, but some of the top ones are not having a clear game plan or vision. What's the purpose? Why are we embarking on this? Not doing the right things. In other words, not kind of really understanding what problem are we trying to solve, and then focusing all the time, energy, resources, expertise around those set of things. We all live in a resource-constrained economy, institution, so we just need to be very conscious about which ones we can take on and take them all the way through successful fruition. Leadership and sponsorship, you will hear me saying that multiple times, very critical success factors, having the right kind of leadership, having the right level of sponsorship, not just at the onset, but throughout the journey. Think of business transformation as a journey where you're moving the organization or a particular functional area or a particular business unit. You're moving it from, say, a current state to a future state. And that journey could last anywhere 12 months, 18 months, 36 months, and you're delivering results constantly on an intermittent basis. So in other words, the organization is not going to benefit only when the journey is totally complete. But then to keep that sustained level of momentum, energy, you need the right sponsorship, right leadership throughout the journey, because as you all know, we live in a very complex state of business, rapid change, technological developments, speed of change, organizational leadership changes happen. So how to make sure that you have the leadership and sponsorship throughout the journey. Not doing things right, it gets back to the fundamentals of execution. So whenever I mention the word execution, think of it as project management, program management, having a good plan in place, executing the plan, identifying issues, risks. So that's what, not doing things right. And then this does require out-of-the-box thinking, right? So we're talking about innovation, so we're talking about step change and not focusing on tactics. To do all this, organizations need to not only have the right enabling tools, templates, but they need to have the right talent. And we'll touch upon that a little bit. Talent gaps. If you don't have the right players working on these kind of transformational initiatives, that is resulting in higher probability of facing greater challenges. So some of you might say, well, Satish, all that is there, all these statistics are there, then why do we have to embark on these kind of large-scale, complex initiatives or programs or complex transformational exercises? The fact of the matter is most companies, non-profits, government organizations, they really kind of don't have a choice. So if you think of company performance, there are organizations that are really dominating the market. So they want to continue dominating the market, right? Whether it's the Apples, Googles, Wells, JP Morgan Chase, Anthem, etc. Right? So those are dominating. They want to dominate the market. Right? Then those who are kind of really struggling, they really have to do something about it. Otherwise, they're getting into bankruptcy. They need to be turning around. And then those who are really in the kind of the neutral zone, right? I mean, sooner or later, they have to decide what their play is. Right? So there's rapid innovation going on. Technology, digitization is impacting all business processes, all companies, and it includes companies, big companies, small companies, private companies, right? Public companies. So SMAC, right? That acronym stands for your mobility, analytics, cloud computing, social, right? So those are the technologies we're talking about, and IoT is the Internet of Things, right? Even the ability to, before you get home or from your workplace, being able to control certain devices in your house, through thermostat, etc. Or even when you talk of automobiles, there are so much electronics and sensors inbuilt, right? So your vehicle is being constantly tracked because it's connected to the internet, right? So there's all these technologies that are really kind of changing the business models upside down. So companies, the legacy companies, have to kind of figure out how they can leverage all this. Business value, it's kind of simply translates into a ratio of value benefits divided by cost. So organizations, not just the CFO, leaders, middle managers, they want to know, am I getting more benefits in relation to the cost, right? So that's pure business value. Globalization, right? The 24/7 by 365, offshoring, outsourcing, let's go where the talent is. So it's not just about cost, but also by using by 24/7 clock, you can reduce the turnaround time and then get things done faster, right? So globalization has been a phenomenon around and continues to change businesses. Huge uptake in customer experience. I'm sure all of you can relate to, well, more personalization, more customization. I flew in earlier this morning. So at the airport, do I want to use a self-service kiosk? Do I want to have my ticket, on my smartphone? Do I want to go and go to the counter, right? So as a customer, I am kind of going to prefer whatever I like, right? Similarly, in the payment processing world, there is humongous changes. How do you want to pay someone else? If you're going to get a cup of coffee at Starbucks, now do you want to order ahead of time, just show up, pick it and go, right? How do you want to pay? And not a single day goes by where either PayPal or Square or Apple, all these companies, they're constantly revolutionizing how you can transact business, right? So those are some examples, right, but you as a customer, because all these tools are now available, if certain companies are providing that to you, then that's kind of your base. So others, have to recalibrate themselves. So these are some of the kind of the drivers, and a layer on that would be just macroeconomic trends, right? Macroeconomic trends, M&A, right? Acquisitions are happening, higher regulation in certain markets. So for example, I saw some hands about healthcare, Obamacare, in the financial services world, CFPB doing increasing regulations. So all these M&A regulations, status of competition, that those business drivers are forcing everyone to focus on transformation. About 6 months ago, I wrote an article for AMA, American Management Association. This is not part of the book that I authored, but over a period of time, in doing work for companies in financial services, healthcare, and high tech, and those are the three industry sectors I've spent a lot of time and many years. So for me, competitive advantage is an aggregation of three components for companies. So they need to be innovative, they need to be able to strategically differentiate themselves in the marketplace, as well as they need to have operational superiority. And it's not easy, right? It's really difficult. But high-performing companies, any sector you may want to take, and companies, sometimes falter and they may be high-performing once upon a time, but subsequently they are not. But those are the three elements, if combined and if companies can build capability around that, that leads to sustainable competitive advantage. One example I can kind of quickly throw in here, and there are all kinds of innovation examples, whether you talk about Uber, Airbnb, now they're all kind of focusing on, there is a lot of capacity. Now, how can that capacity be used? And that has led to some creation of new business models, and they are innovative. They're strategically different, but they're still trying to figure out how to be operationally scale, etc. Another example that comes to mind would be the whole automobile sector. Electric car, driverless car. As an example, think about Tesla. So as far as innovation goes, again, a lot of innovation, a lot of technology, vehicle always connected to the internet, right? So definitely, maximizing battery technology. So some of the aspects of innovation from Tesla is that. But on the other hand, they've also kind of said, we are going to distribute our vehicles differently. We are going to have our own stores, our own dealer networks, somewhat like Apple, so that we can influence the customer experience. How we go about it. Is that going to fly, not fly? We kind of don't know, right? But again, that's kind of an innovation as to how they're going about it. On strategic differentiation, they said, well, there are a lot of other, electric vehicles out there, others are jumping on the bandwagon, but we don't want to be competing with Nissan Leaf and others, so they chose the affluent market, right? So they're going after the affluent market in terms of strategic differentiation. Now, one area where they are still trying to build up is operational superiority, because they are still kind of trying to figure out, given the factory manufacturing capacity they have, how can they have built more vehicles, within a certain time frame. As soon as, I guess when Elon Musk kind of says, they're going to be able to deliver only 15,000 vehicles in a quarter or in a certain year, suddenly, the stock, takes a deep dive because the expectations are bent up that they can manufacture more vehicles in a certain time, right? So manufacturing efficiency and the ability to do that, so that in this example is more about operational superiority. So this kind of gets to the crux of a solid framework that application of which is important for transformational exercises or programs to be successful. So what really needs to happen, and increasingly companies are obviously doing all this, right? So I'm putting a wrapper around it, it's the necessity to align and integrate what I call as 6 dimensions. Generally speaking, when you talk to many practitioners, middle managers, subject matter experts, you always they talk about importance of people, process, and technology, which I think is important. It's just really critical. But but there are some other dimensions that are important. So in this case, people, process, technology is this right side. But the other aspects is, okay, so what's the strategy? What's the purpose? What's the mission? And what's the roadmap? So it's very important to integrate a strategy. Similarly, very important to integrate structure. Is it going to be centralized, decentralized? Are we going to outsource, nearshore? Are we going to do a shared services model? Because all these things are very much available. Many organizations are doing it, so you have to look at it from that vantage point. And then the importance of measurement architecture. Because when someone talks about the initiative did not deliver what it was supposed to, sometimes the fundamental problem is, what were the expectations? What was the program supposed to deliver in the front place? What was the business case around it? So it's very important to have a measurement architecture. So a measurement architecture has to be really grounded in what are the strategic objectives, what are the business outcomes, and what are the business outcomes that this transformation endeavor is going to deliver, and then further decompose it into specific benefits, key value indicators, and then supporting metrics. So what I pretty much talk about is the importance and criticality of bringing all these 6 components together throughout a transformation journey. And not that one component is more important than the other, but it's if certain pieces are missing, that's where organizations do not reap the benefit of the transformational goal. The extent to which a component may be more dominant than the other would really depend on the nature of the transformation itself. But it's really important to approach it in a very holistic way. So that's one of the critical aspects that needs to be kept in mind. So with that backdrop, now I'm going to jump into the second part. But let me take a quick pause. I think we're doing good on time. Any quick questions, comments? Are we good so far? Yes, sir.
You talk about customer experience. What do you mean? How customer experience is with your company, or does that mean that you are responsible for the experience you get?
If I'm following you right, customer experience in the context I talk about is if I'm the end customer and if I'm consuming any product, is my experience great, where I'm so thrilled about it that I'm going to be loyal, I'm going to refer others to it, I'm going to create a positive vibe around it. So that is my expectation as a customer. But then, so if you're the company that is providing that product, right? And then we are working for that company, we all. So then it's our goal and objective to really kind of understand what that is and can we create that experience for that customer. Does that?
So what you're trying to say is that the customer expects to get a good experience out of something. And the people that provide the product have to make sure they do get a good experience.
Definitely, yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. And the reason I'm saying that is because now there are all kinds of technologies and tools and enablers that are available which give the company enough insight and they can make it happen. So they can make it happen in the front end when they are designing a product or a service. They have enough intelligence, enough information, and so now they have to figure it out how to make it happen. And to the extent you can differentiate and offer something a bit more than what others are providing, that's where most companies are going after. Right, good question. So let's kind of drill now a little bit more deeper. Now the next part of the segment is really around. I want to use the opportunity to interject some quick examples along the way, but also give you like a roadmap. I want you to walk away with kind of a roadmap. So all this is good. So what should I be doing different? Whatever your role might be, whether you are like an IT manager, project manager, whether you are an analyst, whether you are a subject matter expert, I just want you to kind of walk away with, those are some aspects, I don't know, whatever I'm working on, are we approaching it that way? So hopefully, it's a fairly, 10-step roadmap with different pieces to it, but at least that's something that I want to kind of get across here. So what is transformation management? So to make business transformation successful, you need to have rigor around managing it well from start to end. So what that means is that you need to be able to execute the strategy to realize the vision. So business transformation management is, we need to be able to discover, plan, execute, and transition the transformation program. So if you want to think of it as building blocks, so that's what is really happening in business transformation management. You are moving from current state to future state. So that journey is what I'm calling as a transformational journey. And to excel at that, to excel at managing transformational initiatives, to excel at managing transformational initiatives to success, it's very, very critical that you factor in and align and integrate the 6 different components that we talked about. Sometimes I think of the 6 different components as 6 different dimensions, and those dimensions are people, process, technology, strategy, structure, and measurement. We touched upon a little bit around companies to build a sustained competitive advantage. They need to have some talent, they need to build capabilities. Capability building also takes time. And also capability building has to be constantly progressed. At times, in some companies, I hear the word maturity level, right? So when we talk about capability building, we're also talking about building capabilities, building maturity, and sustaining that maturity. So in the context of building a transformational capability within the enterprise, within the business unit you're part of, first is the 6-dimensional management that we just talked about. So in the context of any problem, project, initiative that you're involved with, are you looking at it from those 6 different lenses? Right? And for you to be able to look at it from a 6 different lens perspective, you need to have individuals, team members with different expertise, different background, because it's a fairly big space. So it's very common to have teams of people with different background, then only you can really kind of accomplish that. So I'm not talking about one individual or a small team having expertise around all the 6 dimensions, because all these 6 dimensions are huge, they're complex, there are all kinds of tools and techniques within each one of those dimensions, and it takes many years of real work to build some deep expertise around those. The other four are, business analysis. So for me, business analysis management is not just creation of the requirements document, functional specification, ensuring that everyone signs off on the requirements, use cases. It's also a little bit more around, business analysis, solving the problem, looking at different options, looking at different scenarios, doing cost-benefit analysis, being able to build a business case, also being able to manage expectations of stakeholders. So for me, all that constitutes, business analysis management. And then these three can kind of go hand in hand. So this is the discipline of project management, program management, and portfolio management. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but these are, whenever you've got multiple work streams, work tracks, then you get into program. When it's a project, it's just like one work stream, one work track. Program will be, you're managing multiple projects, think of it that way. And as soon as you get into portfolio management, it's a little bit more about what projects you want to work on, get executive level approval on that, build a business case. So that's all, portfolio management to make sure, that we are working on the right kind of projects. So we talked about the 6 components, well, those are 6 standalone components. Now, how do I kind of move it forward? So that gets into the approach. How are you going to start approaching a transformational type of exercise or a transformational type of project or program? So on one hand, you've got the 6 dimensions. So first you need to almost like have a solid foundation. So creation of a solid foundation is like creating an architecture. So if some of you are from an IT background, in the IT world, you create a technical architecture, you create application architecture, data architecture. If some of you are from a business background, you always kind of say, well, we need to first understand what the business architecture is. What are some of the business capabilities we are trying to build? So think of it as, you need to be able to fuse the business architecture and the technical architecture. And the way to do that, which I kind of sum it up as a transformational architecture is, so first, it's kind of a roadmap, high level. First, really need to understand, articulate, define the program vision. As part of that, you have to really assess and diagnose the current state. And again, whenever we're talking about it, we're looking at it against all these 6 dimensions. Design the future state. When you're designing the future state, don't think of it only as process, don't think of it only as technology, but think of it as along all these dimensions. And then as these kind of initiatives and endeavors are many times a paradigm shift, you need to have a solid business case around it. And what's the benefit, what's the value, how long is it going to go, what are the risks we are going to take collectively. So that's all part of the business case, and then that gives you enough to create a high-level program plan. So going through this exercise, kind of a discovery exercise, lays the transformation architecture for the initiative. Just real quick, show of hands in your organization. How would you characterize the maturity level of transformational work in your companies? I'm just more kind of curious. Let me give a pause here. Yeah, how many say like strongly agree? Just to put it back of the envelope kind of exercise. What about agree? Okay, great. What about neutral? Yes, I was like same kind of ratio. Maybe neutral, I see a little bit more number of hands. What about disagree? Where is Gerard there? So I've been doing on and off some of the webinars, and I've been, in addition to the research on my work, I've been doing webinars, 1,000, 1,500 folks, global participants and all. Quite often, I usually land, when I take a poll like this, usually I see more number of hands in the agree, neutral, disagree. I mean, just, that's just my back of the envelope as to what I am kind of, seeing in the marketplace. So it again adds back to what we've been talking about, where there is good room for making further improvement, and there are certain gaps in how we go about doing this. right? So I know this is a loaded slide, a lot of things happening here, but I will dissect it. Really, the rest of the presentation is really around this roadmap. So this is a 10 steps approach to make sure that you are at least on the right track throughout the transformation journey. So I talk about whether you want to think of it as 10 principles, 10 elements, whatever is your frame of reference. But we talk about identifying and describing the problem, making sure you have a vision. There is a strong sponsorship, importance of having institutionalized controls, governance. What's the definition of success? Are we all on the same page? What constitutes success? Going through that. Once we have all that, those foundational elements, what's the approach we are going to be using on this journey to be successful? Need for stakeholder engagement and strong partnership, leadership, constantly monitoring and having contingencies, and then also having an operational transitional plan. So I'm going to go a bit deeper into each one of these. I just wanted to kind of lay it out there. So this is managing complex programs. This is managing strategic initiatives. Yesterday I was in a meeting at a company where we were talking about how to set up an EPMO, enterprise PMO function. So it was not a transformational initiative per se, but that company is going. It's a healthcare company in the payer space. So they are going through their own transformational as a company. But as part of, to facilitate transformation of the company, one of the things that they are doing is setting up an EPMO. EPMO is Enterprise Project Management Office, because they don't have one. So as we were talking through it, so even a construct like this, you can apply. So your goal is to create, design, and implement an EPMO. So again, some of the things is, okay, why are you doing this? Why are you building an EPMO? What problem are you trying to solve? Okay, what's your vision for, what is the charter of the EPMO? What is it supposed to do? What it is not supposed to do, right? So the power of this roadmap or framework is that it did not necessarily be for any large-scale transformation exercise that you're doing. You can really kind of apply it to any particular aspect of work that you may be doing, right? So that's kind of the beauty of this one. This is industry agnostic. It is the technology agnostic. As I've done work not only for large companies in different industry sectors, I've done a lot of work for mid-sized companies, small-sized companies, some high-growth kind of startups. I've done not too many years, but some work, for quasi-government entities. Any of them, it applies. It doesn't matter if you're doing supply chain management work, if you're doing customer relationship management work, you're talking about compliance initiative. I heard M&A. This framework, it applies to any kind of these kind of contextual situations. So let's kind of dig a little bit deeper. Problem. So what problem are we trying to solve? So it's important to go through collectively as a team, identify, define, socialize, and then agree. And there are different tools out there to do that. Voice of the customer, some of you might have heard about it. Voice of the customer is the technique. In my book, I talk about environment scanning, which is another technique which is more like bringing in the outside-in perspective. Some of you may have heard the term SWOT, strengths, weakness, opportunities, threat. So there are different types of techniques that are available that you can apply to really kind of work through the problem definition stage or phase. One real-world example I can give of that I was involved with was for a financial capital management company. Highly successful, high growth, feeling the pain of growth, lack of infrastructure to grow. So it started off as, well, what we are doing on QuickBooks, etc. doesn't help, it's not enough. But as we started working through collectively as a team, did a series of workshops, involved other functions, not just the finance function, the marketing function, the product group, the IT group. Pretty quickly, the problem that they were solving, this is a mutual fund company, so a couple of things they wanted to do. They wanted to offer institutional mutual funds. Secondly, they also wanted to offer international funds, so they wanted to get into international markets. So the next thing so that's what they really wanted to do, right? But if you had not gone through this exercise of, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? We would have gone and said, okay, for QuickBook, maybe you need to just replace it with some other ERP solution. Okay, but that would not have ultimately met stakeholder expectations, and ultimately it would not have delivered the business value that they as a company needed. So I'm just trying to fast pace here, just trying to give you an example of what I mean by short-circuiting the problem definition stage and what the implications of those could be. Very important to kind of articulate the vision and objectives. We talked a little bit about what's the purpose of transformation. So again, it's one of those things where you have to have a diligent exercise around it. And one of the things that I found in many companies is you really need to be able to connect and effectively message the purpose, the vision at different levels of the organization. Because ultimately, folks are going to say, okay, what's in it for me? If I'm a manager, what's in it for me? What's in it for my team? If I sit in IT, if I sit in marketing, if I sit in legal department, questions are going to come from their perspective. What's in it for me? What am I going to benefit? So to the extent there is enough, you always have charismatic leaders who kind of go out and do a great job in a town hall, in a all company-wide settings. But then you need to be able to constantly enforce and remind everyone about the goal, the purpose, the vision on an ongoing basis, and it has to be done at all levels of the organization. Securing cross-functional executive sponsorship is very important. An example that comes to mind is a big high-tech company that I was involved with about 5 to 7 years ago, where they're really trying to redesign their procurement function. So this is a company which has got a big services organization. They've got a big, hardware business. They've got a big software business. They've got printers. So what their strategic agenda was, how can we really use a managed services model and then consolidate vendors and then redesign the entire, procurement process so that we can really make huge cost difference in terms of procurement of goods and services. So to do something like that, from a sponsorship perspective, it took about 8 weeks, was to really come up with a sponsorship model towards what the company is trying to do. So when I talk about sponsorship model, it's about, okay, so we really had to kind of say, okay, which are the lines of business involved? Within those lines of business, who is willing to be the sponsor and has buy-in? Then kind of moving on, to the next level within each one of those LOBs, who can really make this happen, make sure that you have their sponsorship and their commitment. And in this case, we're talking about they're using a managed services, so they were going to use an external vendor to start helping them. So again, getting buy-in and partnership with the services vendor and making sure that there is sponsorship from them to customize and tailor their solution to this particular company's needs. So so the sponsorship model, based upon who we are talking about in terms of stakeholders, it has to be stakeholders from the company, but also from business partners, if that's applicable. So that's kind of what we're talking about in the context of sponsorship model. As far as governance goes, governance is really all about roles, responsibilities, being clear, making sure there are institutionalized controls, who is going to be making decisions, how do things kind of get escalated. So really having those things kind of laid out, I talk of them in my book as the necessity to have a governance model. So it's really very important in the context of an initiative or program, define the governance model, implement the governance model, and then make sure that that governance model is being enforced. Some of you might be able to relate to this term of phase gates. When you move from one phase to the next, there is kind of a phase gate, so to speak, conceptual, where a lot of things have to be checked and whatnot, and then only you move to the next phase of work to get buy-in, funds get released. So that's an example of a governance practice. So it's really important to have governance, cascade of meetings, status reporting, but having all that laid out and not creating that in the ivory tower or in vacuum, but really creating that along with the help of your core team who are going to be involved. So that way they are also going to be evangelists in implementing the governance model. Outcomes. We touched upon a little bit earlier around what success, what are the strategic objectives, what are the key value indicators. So there are some quite a few robust tools out there. Have you heard of a balanced scorecard? Some of you may have heard about it, right? So one good way to think about it is like when you talk about outcomes, customer perspective, shareholder perspective, from an employee perspective, right? And from an operational perspective, right? So what are the outcomes that are needed, and what are some of the underlying key value indicators and metrics, right? So that's what is the aspect of defining those. There are different techniques out there. Balanced scorecard was an example, but then there are business outcome modeling is another example, business value justification, business performance calibration. So there are a lot of different techniques out there which kind of help you in that particular step of the roadmap. Just dawned on me right now. This roadmap of 10 steps and sequence. Bear in mind, it's not very sequential. I mean, though I'm depicting it as sequential, it's really iterative in nature. So in other words, I'm not saying that you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, right? It's kind of an iterative exercise as you go through it. Yes, there is some sequence inbuilt in it. Yeah, there is some strategic sequence as to how you kind of go about it. But at the same time, it's a very kind of an iterative approach, right? Talking about approach, when there's a problem, and if it's been defined, identified, and we are bringing in various subject matter experts from different parts, right, then you need that creative juices, thinking, to also come up with the right approach for overcoming that problem and making sure that it's a less risky approach after factoring whatever the constraints might be. Whatever resource constraints might be from the leadership, from the board, from the CEO, etc. One example that, real world one that I was involved with that comes to mind is some of the work I have done for a biotech company, highly successful biotech company. So they kind of said that we have to reduce cost, and there were some specific targets that the board had given them on how much the cost should be reduced in certain time frame and over a 3-year period. And this was around all their back office functions. So it was around HR, finance, payroll, and the approach or the strategic plan to do that was to outsource those functions to an offshore player. So they went through that whole exercise, selected the player, selected the vendor, transitioned, moved all those processes. It took about 23 months to do all that. And then when they kind of looked at the scorecard, they did reduce the cost strategically. They were tracking it. They allowed some time for transition. But still kind of it missed the mark quite a bit. And then as part of that analysis, it kind of became clearer to the team was when they went through all this, they never really studied all their business processes. The finance, the HR, etc. processes which were being outsourced. They just took what they were doing and they just moved it to the vendor, outsourced vendor, right? But then when in the offshore location they started executing these processes, they found some major gaps in the processes. So from an approach perspective, if they had factored in that along the way they should have looked at what are some of the process gaps, let's kind of analyze it, let's kind of fix it. Remember that now we're going to be doing it offshore as well, and then kind of go about it. The strategic cost reduction target would have been achieved in the desired time frame. So that's just an example of the importance of having the right approach. I think we've got about 5 minutes or so, so I'm going to fast pace the remaining 4 here, right? So very important to have strong engagement. And engagement, stakeholder engagement is, for me, boils down to expectation management. How are you going to manage expectations of stakeholders? Internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and you can do that through communications, you can do that through training, you can do that through coaching. So these are all different techniques you can use, but it's really around how to do that, keeping them engaged is really, really important. Leadership. I think of leadership also as not something that only the steering committee, only the sponsors have to do. We have to kind of now think of leadership as multi-level. All of us in this room are leaders. So whenever we are on projects or programs, doing any work, we really have to think about leadership at an individual self level. If you have a small team you're managing, leading them. If you've got others whom you're reporting into, so they are leaders. So I like to think about the importance of really having leadership at multiple levels, and that is really a secret sauce. It's really a secret sauce. It's almost like an art. It's not like a science. It's almost like an art. But it's important to kind of have that, make it happen. Kind of a multi-level leadership model, and then that really increases the probability of success. Increases the probability of success of why you got into leading this, embarked on this initiative. Monitoring aggressively is it's talking about complexity, speed, pace of change, technology changing. So monitoring kind of always helps you. It kind of helps you in what changes we need to make. Many of you might have been seeing a lot of using of agile approaches, agile techniques. It's not like you frame something up and then you have got 6 months, 8 months, to deliver. But by that time things have changed. So monitoring, helps you to kind of be current, change course. Also very important to always have a plan B, right? So if plan A kind of doesn't work, being able to switch to plan B is very important to have contingency planning. And the last component is many times kind of gets ignored or doesn't get enough attention is how do you transition it? We talk about not only improving business performance as the theme of today's talk, right? But also sustaining the improved business performance or sustaining the future state that you landed at. Now, in order to be able to have that sustained level of performance, higher performance, it's really, really important to kind of have a transition strategy. It's important to create a transition plan and also then implement the transition plan. So that takes time. That takes planning. So that's something that one has to be thinking ahead, factoring it. We talked a little bit earlier about capability. Now, does your operations team or your operations function have the capability to take all these on? And if not, what needs to happen? Whether it's a training, whether it's the communication, right? Whether it's need to add new kind of skill sets, within the operational group, and also, allowing enough time for a very tight knowledge transfer plan. So those are all important facets, aspects of transition, that is very important and critical, so that it's not a jump in performance, and then afterwards, you kind of see a downward slope. You see a jump in performance and you want to keep at it, right, at the new performance level. So it's very important to focus on the transition. So with that kind of said, just in overall, kind of just to net everything out, right? So what we have covered or talked about is importance to build transformational capability for improved competitiveness, and There are three aspects to it: innovation, operational superiority, and strategic differentiation. And I would like to challenge each one of you in the sense that at an individual level, right? So if you're thinking about, at an individual level, so think about what is it that you can do to bone up your skill sets. Whether it's, getting involved in the right projects, whatever tuition budget, training budget you have, how to make sure you're constantly learning. If there are certain certification programs out there, and there are so many certifications, if you're in the security space, CISSP, if you're in the project program management space, if you're in the agile space, if you're in the business analysis space, right? There are all kinds of, ongoing learning certification programs, right? What are some of those things that you can do to increase and enhance, your own capability, right? So that's the transformational capability. Again, think about all the 6 dimensions we've been talking about, right? Strategy, people, process, technology. Even if you yourself may not be able to control it, but how can we influence it? When you are in sessions, when you're meeting with others, when you're working knee deep, how can you kind of say, are we factoring all these things? A lot about what I've been covering is not just about strategy. I mean, it's also about, at the end of the day, there is more power to execution and making sure that you're executing the business strategy, executing the plan. So in order to do that, you need some really rigorous practices around portfolio, program, project management, as well as organizational change management. Organizational change management is the people skills, the people component, the soft skills, but then that also is at an individual level as well as at an organizational level. And so the discipline of strategic change management has progressed a lot. So there are a lot of tools, techniques out there which also has to come into bear for driving successful change. And last but not the least, to make end-to-end transformation really come to fruition and be successful in stakeholders' eyes, it's important to follow and adhere and apply a holistic approach and apply the different components that we talked about. I know I went very fast. I just had to do the best I could. The book that I've authored, so each of these 10 components are standalone chapters. I rolled different techniques along the way: business performance calibration, voice of the customer, governance modeling. So in each of those 10 components, which are each of a chapter, I've thrown in, elaborated on those techniques, as well as, I've written like 10 different case studies, which are really the real world examples that I've been involved with. With that kind of said, I think we can dive straight into Q&A. I know that some of you have to leave the room at 7, so, but I'm going to be around hanging out, so we can always, talk more one-on-one as well. Yes, sir?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How could Volkswagen have ended up putting false software in so that they could pass, smog test with their cars if they were following your roadmap? It would seem to me they almost find out in the beginning, right?
Yeah, no, I think, it's a good question. It's a loaded question too. I'm just kind of, because I've just like many of us, I've seen it at a high level and I've read it, about the whole debacle with Volkswagen. So I cannot specifically comment, on that and what happened. But it's kind of clear, right? There are certain leadership level things that were missed out. Certain things came down from the top. Maybe there was the whistleblowing aspect, but I think sometimes it's just circumvention of controls. Because if you don't have controls and governance, you're just kind of going on momentum and growth. Maybe lack of adequate knowledge. Because we're a global company and it's manufacturing vehicles for Europe, US, Asia Pac. Maybe not having a deep understanding of some of the regulatory requirements that have to be met by the teams, so a lot of these things, come into play. Whether, there are some policy implications, So that would be my quick take on that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's again back to there's an instance, right, where after the fact, the problem has been uncovered and there are huge liabilities and huge implications. I mean, I would say, at least maybe they can use some of the aspects we talked about to get out of it, right? So if you're thinking of what else has happened, but now if you're looking at a forward orientation, I would kind of say, maybe these are the key things that they need to, as they do the post-mortem, right? So maybe they need to look at all these aspects that we just talked about.
I just couldn't see how they could even think about designing those cars if they didn't take that into consideration right from the very beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And work at it.
Yeah.
I mean, it would make them cost how many years?
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. Go ahead.
So one of the 10 steps you noted was to provide leadership across all levels. Can you give us some practical examples from business today where an organization has done exactly that?
Sure. I'm thinking of this mortgage insurance company. So I was involved on an 18-month exercise with them. So they're in the mortgage insurance space. So their customers are Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the banks, so that their loans are protected. So if you did not put enough down payment, etc. So their product is mortgage insurance, and there are not too many companies in that space. So they had embarked on a program to beef up, enhance their technology. So it was a technology initiative. So myself and 3 others, we started off with a 8-week kind of a discovery exercise where how do you take a 2-tier architecture into a 3-tier architecture from a technology perspective. So that's how it just kind of started. But the next thing, the whole program was about redesigning their policy servicing function. So policy servicing in this world is, sending bills out, collecting the premiums, right? So that's the business process we are talking about. So in the context of that, the steering committee initially was, in the context of leadership, it was, here is the CIO, here is the VP of architecture or platforms, here is the VP of application development, and here is the VP of operations. It started like that, that we need only these people as the leaders and there are teams beneath them working on it. But then given that this is really a more broader aspect, so we kind of got involved product management, we also got involved compliance. So now product management, they wanted to make sure that they're able to do this for their international customers. So they wanted to change they wanted to make sure that architecture allowed them to do that. Now the regulatory and the legal guys, right, they were like, whatever we're doing is great, but this is a highly regulated environment, we need to make sure that all those are factored in. So from a leadership perspective, so what we did was we kind of branched it out. So this whole exercise, lasted for about 22 months or so. The first 2 months was just focused on the technical architecture assessment. So as we kind of moved on to the next phases, right, of process analysis, process redesign, and implementing, designing new technology. So the leadership model included not only these VPs, right, but it also included the VPs from compliance, legal, from the marketing, from product management. But then also we set up like leads, leads for each of them beneath them. And then we had a PMO type of office which focused only on the mechanics of the project plan, process, etc. So we had a leader there as well. So for me, this is an example of kind of not saying this is a technology endeavor, here is the CIO, and here are the 3 VPs, and they are the leaders, right? So we kind of totally approached it saying, that's there, but here are the leaders from the other functions who are maybe peers, right? But then not only that, then we also need the next level of leaders who are kind of, day in and day out. So we not only had the project manager, program manager, but then when we also had, here is the project lead. The project lead reported into the project manager reported into the director, and then the VP. So almost we created a leadership model in this example. And in fact, so that engagement really, instead of it being 22 months, we were able to get that done in about like 18 months, that re-engineering exercise. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when we talk about leadership at multiple levels. Does that kind of
That's helpful,
make
yes.
sense? Okay, great. Any others? Yeah, go ahead.
So you touched briefly on the soft skills required for
Yeah.
organizational change management. A lot of transformation programs fail because of a lack of effective change management. Now, based on your experience, what are some of the successful approaches that you see to change management?
Good question. I mean, first and foremost, just the recognition of the fact that that's an important aspect, right? Because the team, the leaders, whosoever you're working with, first, you need to make sure, create a burning platform that this is important. We need to weave in organization change management into this program. Because from a budgeting perspective, and I've seen this in many cases, particularly when you're more on the IT side of the house, sometimes I found that it's more appealing and business side can quickly get to it. Like they can say this is going to impact the end user has to be trained. So they are a little bit more open in terms of budget and the importance and the support and sponsorship. Sometimes you don't get as much of that from the IT side. So first and foremost, I would say important to educate, make everyone aware, kind of create a informal business case, as to this is needed, this is important. So that entails, some training, because individuals are coming from different, backgrounds. So that's one part of it. Then the other part of it is there are change management methodologies out there. There is John Carter, there is ProSci. There are some different, change management methodologies. Certain companies have standardized on certain methodologies. Other companies have created their own. Kaiser has created their own. Comcast, as an example, they use ProSci's change management methodology. So again, this is not about methodology per se, but to answer your question, so then you really need to have a structured approach of now how are you going to work the change management part. The most common one that I've seen is you need to have a change management strategy, you need to have a change management plan, and then you need to execute the change management plan. So to do that, you have seen change sponsorship model, I've seen change agents. So sometimes you need kind of roles like that, champions who are kind of evangelizing and talking about change. So those are some aspects. Many companies, what I've seen is that they think of change management means communications and training. But another realization is it's not just communications and training, it's around change impact analysis, what's the impact, who is getting impacted, then having a plan around readiness. So sometimes you have to do organizational readiness. So there are all kinds of instruments out there. Some companies are used to fast change. Some companies aren't. Jared and I were talking about cultures. So when you talk about culture, organizational culture, some cultures have a greater readiness for change and they can do it. Some others, they don't. So you have to kind of adjust and factor all that in kind of, bringing in the change management. It has to be along the way. Again, sometimes what happens is folks think that change management is something that you kind of slap in the subsequent phases of an exercise. But again, it's one of those things where you need to frame it up much sooner in the journey and make sure it continues throughout. So that's my immediate response. But I can talk more with you on that offline. All right, great. Thank you. I think I really enjoyed sharing and I think I had good engagement, which always is fun for me. So it was great, getting some different kind of questions and putting different perspectives on the table. So thanks again.